in it I was christened.
There's someone dreaming.
Late in 1992, fishermen working near an uninhabited island in the Red Sea reported unusually good catches in one particular area. Two divers went down to investigate. They were astounded by what they found. Out of the darkness emerged a museum of war. Bedford trucks, locomotives, rolling stock, aeroplane parts, BSA and Norton motorcycles, Bren gun carriers, rifles, ammunition. They had stumbled upon SS Thistlegorm, one of the many vessels providing Britain's only lifeline during the Second World War. Merchant ships carried all the nation's food, oil, and munitions, yet many, like this one, did not reach their destination. Those who sailed in them did so at enormous risk. 1 in 4 merchant seamen never returned.
I joined Thistlegorm in Glasgow. It was partly loaded, but the latter part of the cargo we saw being loaded was mostly ammunition. And it was quite a laugh amongst the lads at the time that if anything happened to us, if we were bombed or torpedoed, then we need parachutes, not life jackets.
The second time I joined the Thistlegorm, I'd been home on leave, and when I came back to the ship, I didn't know what was in the cargo at all, because I didn't see what was being loaded on. The only thing I saw was 2 railway trains on deck, consisting of engines, tenders, and tank wagons. I was 18 years of age at the time, and my job on board was radio officer.
At the time I was 21 years old, and I've been in the Merchant Navy since about 1937. And she was a smart ship. I liked it. We had on occasion to join some ships in terrible condition, but I liked the Thistlegorm. She looked like being a happy ship.
Summer 1941. British and Commonwealth troops are fighting fiercely in North Africa. Vital supplies are urgently needed, but with the Mediterranean dominated by Axis forces, the chosen route for SS Thistlegorm is round Africa via the Cape, a dangerous journey of 12,000 miles lasting 10 weeks with just one stop, Cape Town.
We had 1 or 2 days in Cape Town, and 3 of the lads were missing at sailing time. Just before the ship cast off ropes, we saw them coming up the quay. One was in a wheelbarrow, and the other 2 were bringing him back to the ship. I wish they never made it, because later were killed, 3 of them. I wish they'd missed the ship.
It was quite a happy crew. It had to be, because you were going to stay with these people for anything up to 3 years, and you couldn't afford enemies on board ship. So therefore, you sorted your differences out and settled down to whatever came.
It's been in our possession since Grandad was a lad. I'll tell you what it is and then you'll know.
The Merchant Navy crew on the Thistlegorm were quite a good crowd. There were 9 of us gunners, I recollect. There was about 35, 39 crew. And we shared stuff with them. They lent us books, we passed books around, we played cards with them.
I recall one character on board who was a donkeyman greaser. His name was Secando and his nationality was Armenian. He used to wear a pair of big boots that he never laced up, but he had a habit of leaving his boots beside his bunk, and he would just sit on his bunk and lift his feet out of his boots, swing over, and when he came to get up again, anybody shouted at him, he'd get out, swing his feet into his boots. And one day, we had wooden decks in the cabins, and one day somebody had nailed these boots to the floor, and the poor devil got out and nearly broke his ankles. But, we had quite a number of characters.
From the outbreak of war, cargo ships were armed and became known as defensively equipped merchant ships, DEMS. They were manned by Royal Navy and Army gunners, but much of the equipment was obsolete and hopelessly inadequate.
We had a 4-inch or 4.7, I think it was, on the stern. Everything had to point to the stern, nothing had to point forward. Defensively equipped. There were never enough gunners on watch at one time to man all the guns, so we had to train some of the merchant seamen to help us in various ways, either to pass ammunition, and so we often had to run gun drills and make it up as you went along, really.
Having reached the Red Sea, SS Thistlegorm was met by escort cruiser HMS Carlisle for the journey to the Gulf of Suez.
The role of an escort cruiser is to patrol around a convoy and by using its range and direction finder to give early warning of hostile aircraft. And I was a gunner on HMS Carlisle. The Marines man the 2 guns, number 3 and 4, the aft end of the ship.
We had orders not to man our gun, not to fire our gun, that the Carlisle was the guard ship. We felt it should have been manning, but it was taken out of our hands.
We eventually arrived at the entrance to the Gulf of Suez, where we anchored, awaiting a signal for ships to proceed up to their offloading point, which would probably be Tewfik at the south of the Suez Canal.
Life there, it just more or less came to a standstill because we was there. We wasn't going anywhere in a hurry. We just had to wait until we were sent for. So whilst we were there, we just had to go and bear it.
Well, we were so bored, so very hot. So we dropped a rope ladder over the side of the ship, and then we made it a rule that only one person at a time would go in to the sea. And we either jumped or dived in, and then turned around and swum like hell for the ladder, and then just jumped up because all the other lads were shouting, "Shark, shark, shark," and you didn't know whether it were true or whether they were still pulling your leg, but you didn't take a chance. Because it was so hot, it was even very hot in our quarters at night because we were in between the decks and we were surrounded by steel, small portholes, so we had very little air, especially with the ship being at anchor, no movement. So several of us gunners had brought our hammocks up from our quarters and we had slung them on deck.
The Thistlegorm would be, it's very difficult to estimate distance over water, particularly at night, but I would think certainly less than half a mile. It was certainly possible to see the cranes and the ship, but we couldn't make out what was chained on the upper deck. And we could see nearly all the other ships at the anchorage and the other escorts and both sides of the Red Sea at that point because of this huge moon, which was the most striking thing that I've ever seen. And probably this is why it etched itself on my memory.
It was a bright moonlight night, I remember that. And I was sleeping in my hammock, wearing just a wristwatch. My shorts were resting on top of my blanket. And a plane flew around. And it startled me, and I immediately was on my guard, but I thought, well, it can't be an enemy plane because the Garland should have taken over and warned us or fired.
We were able to see this plane, and it was very low and coming, as you can imagine, very fast. And it dipped over the Thistlegorm about masthead height. If the wheels had been down, I would think it would have hit the mast of the Thistlegorm. Of course, we couldn't fire, couldn't do anything about it, because it was not possible for us to depress the guns any further. And there would have been danger to the other ships, and indeed probably to our own stern.
So anyway, I put my shorts on, my swimming trunks on, and didn't go to a gun station because I believe the Carlisle was the guard ship and they hadn't done anything. So I just lay back again in my hammock to go back to sleep. Training, I suppose, came out and I just flung myself out of my hammock onto the deck beneath and crouched behind the winch, and then there was just 2 explosions and a massive flame, and my hammock above my head caught fire.
I just shook my teeth. I says, come on, I says, let's get out, we're on fire aft. I could see it was a big fire, although I didn't know what was in the holes, but that fire is big enough for me, it's serious enough, I've got to get off.
There was a young deck boy who had taken over a hammock next to me, and he was down on the deck also. Whether he had fallen down or would have been blown down, I don't know, but the whole ship was ablaze, and knowing the cargo we carried of ammunition, we just expected one big bang and that would be that. However, I encouraged him to come with me to the rail, and I remember thinking, my folks will never know how I died. And then we went into the water.
After I got my chief roused out of his bunk, I went down on deck and to see what was going on. And when I found out what was going on, there I saw Harry, the fiver, 5th engineer, coming along the deck. And he said to me, Sparky, is this a fire drill? I said, is it? Hell no, it's the real thing. But he was stood there in his pajama trousers. And I said to him, Harry, you can't go on board one of His Majesty's ships dressed in pajama bottoms only. So I took him back to my cabin, which was not far away, and I gave him a suit of clothes to wear, and we went to the one remaining boat that was not smashed up.
With all that amount of fireworks down there, there was bound to be an explosion and it was burning. someone must have had an idea it wasn't going to last all that long, because we got away.
When everybody that was congregated on the little boat deck, when everybody was accounted for and got in the boat, we pulled away then. But some of the crew who lived aft, they could not get to the boat on account of the deck being red hot with the fire. So they had to jump over the stern.
I do recall I was in the water for a period, and whilst in the water, there were a lot of these small arms or whatever they were, fired out of the hold up into the air and coming down in hot fragments onto the water and spitting and hissing around us.
The 303 ammunition was exploding all around us. They were just like wasps going through the air, because there was a lot of tracer bullets. They were going off as well, and you could see those flying through the air. There's like little bees all over the place.
There was a huge sheet of flame which lit up both sides of the Red Sea at that point. We could see it light up the Mount Sinai on one side and Egypt on the other side, and all the ships and everything around. And then all of a sudden, there seemed to be a second explosion, and still looking in that direction, we were amazed to see what turned out to be a railway engine. And it was red hot, with sparks flying from it, and it was coming in our direction. By the time we had stood up and had seen the huge circle left where the railway engine went in the sea, just beyond it, of course, was the Thistlegorm. And from what we could see from where we were, it seemed to fold up, and the stern went up one way and the bows went another, as that sinking ships often do, as if the back was broken, and then it went down in a V shape. And it didn't take very long. It was amazing. One minute it was there and the next minute it wasn't. It was as quick as that.
It was mentioned in conversation when we were going the boat that some of the Dems gunners had been sleeping on number 5 hatch, on the hatch. It was too hot in their accommodation and they slept on deck. And as far as we can make out, they just vanished over the side, and that was it, with the bomb blast. They just went. They weren't accounted for after. We didn't pick them up out of the water. They just gone, and that was it. You couldn't do a thing for them.
One of the lads, who was a non-swimmer, had managed to get up from our quarters after the explosion, and he wouldn't go into the water because of being a non-swimmer, so they persuaded him to put the lifebelt around, and he was put in the water with this lifebelt.
We heard shouts and cries for help. And at one point, shortly afterwards, we heard someone screaming.
And everybody just froze. And somebody just said, "Shark." And we thought, poor sod, he's been taken down by a shark.
I learned later that the lifebelt had been seen. The light had been seen and lifebelt had been collected, but the lad wasn't in there. It's been somewhere around 2 hours from the time of the actual attack until I was in the sick bay of the Carlisle, HMS Carlisle. The main thing that was crossing my mind was my particular pal, Fred Bevan. All I could think about was I knew I was safe, that we were very close and we had exchanged family visits. And the only thing that was really worrying me then was the fact that, was Fred safe? And did I have to go home and tell his people how it had all happened and he was dead? And then the sick bay door opened again and there was Fred standing there, absolutely stark naked. And I'm not ashamed to say that we just simply ran at each other and embraced. And I wouldn't have cared if anybody else had come off that ship apart from Fred, and he felt the same way about me. It's just the way things are, and two particular pals.
It's the only occasion in my life that I can recall shedding tears, and that is when I told my mother and father that Joe had been killed together with the other fellas. I'm not given to tears, and the only time in my life that I recall shedding tears was telling them about the Thistlegorm and Joe Rolfe. He was a great boy with a sense of humour. He was young, he was active, and he was dependable. I can't say any more about that, and if you needed a friend, he was the one to get.
9 men died that night, 4 merchant seamen and 5 Dems gunners. There would have been one more loss if it had not been for the bravery of an able seaman from the Isle of Lewis. Angus Macleay recounted his actions in the Stornoway Gazette of July 1942.
The ship was burning amidships. There was blazing oil running down the deck, and it passed the alley door just as I got there. I made for the side to jump overboard, and the rail was almost red hot under my hand. I don't know why, but just as I was going to jump, I looked back and saw the gunner crawling along the deck. I could see him struggling under a hatch. I lifted the hatch, and it was easy for me to lift him and heave him back into the dinghy. And the skipper said, "You did good."
You did good.
Ah, well, I said, I didn't do it, but the one who gave me strength to do it was the Lord Jesus Christ.
Angus Macleay was awarded the George Medal and Lloyd's War Medal for his gallantry. Thistlegorm was not the intended victim that night. 2 Heinkel 111 bombers from the Luftwaffe's KG-26 Lion Squadron had been given orders to fly an extremely hazardous mission from their base on Crete to the Red Sea, where Allied troop ships were operating. Pilot Heinrich Menger said their target that night was none other than the Cunard liner Queen Mary, carrying 12,000 Australian troops. But the Germans' timing wasn't good enough. Queen Mary passed through the area 2 hours earlier than expected. The bomber crews at the limit of their range were forced to drop their bomb loads to leave enough fuel for the return flight. Thistlegorm was unlucky. Lieutenant Menger and his crew were shot down later that night in the Gulf of Suez and spent the rest of the war imprisoned in Australia.
We eventually landed at Tewfik, Suez. We stayed there a couple of days, and there were 3 of us, just 3 of us left of the gunners. 5 were killed. 1 had a broken leg, fractured leg, and 3 of us walking wounded.
We had been, for want of a better word, dumped ashore in Tewfik, and after contact with the consul, there was no effort made to smooth the waters at all, or even we were surplus to requirements.
Yeah, we were not treated very well. There seemed to be nobody in authority in Tewfik to give us any money or any fresh clothing. We were dressed in rags, just that the lads of the Carlisle had gone through their kit bags and given us any old jumpers, trousers, whatever that they could spare. I remember that the pair of trousers I was given, I had to cut 6 inches off the bottom with a pair of scissors. And we were worse dressed than the poverty-stricken Arabs we met.
And the boatswain took umbrage at this and decided that we would have visible proof of the condition in which we were landed.
And a photograph was taken which he said he would send to the Daily Mirror.
This lack of recognition was typical. In maintaining Allied lifelines, the civilian crews of the Merchant Navy lost more men proportionately than any of the armed forces. Of 120,000 men, 35,000, more than 1 in 4, died. As for the others?
They just survived, and they went back and they joined the next flipping ship. And I didn't know until fairly recently that when a ship sank, the owners stopped their wages from that day. And to me, that was terrible. Yeah, I have every admiration for them.
The merchant service did a great service to the war effort, and they didn't ask for a lot of song and dance in return. I was quite happy. I've got medals in the drawer there. I don't show them because I can go down the street and buy a set like them. Cheap. My name isn't on them. And if it was, I wouldn't be all that bothered about it. It doesn't bring back the friends that I lost.
There'll be many tales like this of the war, but you have your own particular feelings about these sort of things. It's just fate. I survived.